right, welcome everybody to the live stream. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this week's topic. We got a special guest with us today. We'll introduce him here in a minute. But as we try and get some people in, and as we wait for people to kind of filter in here, let's just quick talk about our topic, and then we'll also talk about training real quick. So just so everybody has a good chance, wanted to make sure that everybody gets a chance to know this, but we are offering through the end of the month a sale on our one-on-one training. So if you're interested in any kind of one-on-one training where you can talk to me and we can train you on any topic, whether it's en route, flexi, whatever you want, we do that. And the good thing about this training is that it goes in hour-long sessions, and you get the recording afterwards. So we get to pick whatever topic you want, train you on that, and then you get a recording later. So just wanted to kind of get that out there, and as people are kind of filtering in here. So if you want to get access to that, all you'd have to do is go to our website. I'll show you that here real quick. Go to thinksai.com. You're going to go to the support section, go to en route, and then click on training and events. And that'll pull you up to this event right here. And then if you want, if you click here, this will give you the pricing. And then there's a form that you can fill out right there to get you right to an email to customer service. Or if you prefer and call us, you can always go to support, click on general support, and I believe on here somewhere we have our phone number that you can get access to our technical support. So our technical support customer service. So just be aware that that is there for you guys, and we have a sale going through the end of the month. So if you want to take advantage of that, now's a good time to do that. So now we got a few people watching. Let's go ahead and get started with our topic. So we're going to be talking about rapid texture today. This is a pretty cool tool in en route that's been around for quite a while, but it really allows you to do a ton of cool things using what we would call 2.5D carving or creating textures with geometry, essentially. So today we've got Jesse with us here. He is the product manager for en route, and he's going to be kind of helping me along with this. He's going to do some demos for us. And so he's going to kind of walk us through that. I'm going to ask him some questions and we'll kind of go through that. By the way, we are live, so this means that you guys can ask questions. Anytime you have any questions, just shout them out in the chat. We've got Bennett here live with us too. So he is going to be sending me those messages, and then we'll take a look at those questions. It can be questions that are not necessarily rapid texture. It can be anything about en route, and we'll answer those periodically throughout the show, or maybe just at the end. So to get started, welcome, Jesse. What is rapid texture? What is it all about, and what can we use it for anyways?
Hello, everyone. So what rapid texture really is it's utilizing the profile of your tool in order to create a texture, but you get to utilize the 2D geometry of it in order to create surfaces at a very rapid rate, rather than 3D surfaces, which are generally limited to a Ballnose tool and take quite a bit of machine time in order to process. So with rapid texture, you can use pretty much any tool that you have at your shop in order to create a different surface at a quick rate of time.
So what kind of tools would you typically use with something like a rapid texture that maybe some of these guys might have in their shop?
So probably the most versatile one that I use all the time is a conic tool, also known as a pyramid tool or a V-bit. You can use a 60, a 90, 120, 150, pretty much whatever you have at your shop. I've used end mills as well. End mills will work with this. And Ballnose tools will work as well. But those are the three major types that we use for rapid texture: end mills, conic tools, and Ballnose tools.
Cool. All right, so we've got the tools. So what, why don't we just jump into a demo and show them what the basic rapid texture looks like, and then we can get into something like applying maybe a rapid texture to a sign or something. So how do we get there? What are some of the settings that we want to be worried about, and kind of what things should we kind of be paying attention to?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to limit this to kind of a workable area. So I'm going to work with a 2 foot by 2 foot panel, which we can go to whatever we choose to, but generally, especially with rapid texture, if I'm going to be previewing it, I generally like to limit this just a little bit, so that way I don't have to overload the screen all at once. So I'm going to go ahead and do a 2 foot by 2 foot. And now what we're going to do is inside the surface menu of EnRoute, there's this little gray and blue flag, which is rapid texture. So once we click on it, now we get our panels. So like I was saying, I don't like to overload the screen. If I do want to panel out a job, I can do that here by our rows and columns. But for this one, I'm going to do a single one. So I'm just going to match this to my plate, which is a 2 foot by 2 foot or 24 by 24. Okay. Generally, if I'm doing a panel like this, what I want to do is I want to provide just a little bit of an overlap. So that way, when the cutter comes to an end, you don't get a flat spot towards the edge. Because generally, this will either be pre-cut to size, or I'm going to use an end mill to cut it out at the very end. With no overlap, generally the tool will stop once the profile hits the side. And sometimes you get a little bit of a flat area on the edge. So allowing it to go past that point just a little bit will actually let that texture flow all the way through that panel.
Nice.
Okay. Next thing is our displacement. These are the 4 major variables that you have with rapid texture. Wavelength is essentially how gradual your texture is. On this one, I'm going to use 3 inches. So this one's going to be fairly easy. So it's going to be from crest of wave to crest of wave, is roughly going to be about 3 inches. Offset, this is going to be depending on what type of tool I have. So how far is my spacing in between the lines? For this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a 1 inch spacing. So we have a little bit of exposed material in between. Horizontal amplitude is the one that we get asked the most about. This is essentially how far can the seed contour or the geometry vary from the original. Since we have nothing selected before we went into this tool, EnRoute assumes that it is a 100% straight line. So the farther away this number comes from 0, the more that it will allow to curl that line and distort it. The closer to 0, the more of a straight line you'll see on screen. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, I'm going to do a 1 inch for amplitude, and then my vertical inside here, I'm going to say that I want to go a 1/4 inch into my panel. So this is the Z depth is vertical.
Now that Z depth, that vertical amplitude, is that the maximum that it's going to go, or is it always going to go to 0.25?
Vertical amplitude means that that is the maximum that it's going to go to.
Okay, so it's going to vary then in between 0.25 and 0.
Correct. So if I have randomize on, that is the way that it will happen. So with randomize over here on the right-hand side, what it means is it's taking each line and individually distorting it, giving it that randomized texture. If randomize is unchecked, it will create geometry that looks to be at different depths, but it will all be consistent. Okay. So you can give the appearance of texture without having varied depth, or you can vary the depth to your choice.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then
so
go ahead.
I was gonna say, so let's talk one more thing there. I noticed you select noise. So in your opinion, or it's not in your opinion, but what in your example, what would be the difference between noise and wave? It kind of seems obvious there, but in terms of what it outputs, what's kind of the difference there?
So the big difference between noise and wave is almost all Z depth, so Z variance. So you have more X and Y control in noise, and wave is essentially making the router bit go up and down in the Z, but more in a helical pattern or a smooth pattern, where noise is very random in X, Y, and Z.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
And
so go ahead.
And then the symmetric option. So I noticed you can check both of those. What would be the differences between randomize? You mentioned the randomize the first time. What would be the circumstance where you'd use symmetric only, or maybe both of them?
So essentially, if you're going to use symmetric, you want to produce a panel that you're going to tile out a job. So you want to make a single panel, but you want to be able to, when you piece them together, you want it to kind of flow naturally. And the disadvantage of using symmetric with this is it will alter your parameters just slightly in order to make it more symmetric. So
Okay.
with randomize, you get more of kind of a one-off, a cool look to it, but with symmetric, you're going to alter that and you're going to limit some of your capabilities because you want it to be paneled out.
I see.
In my opinion, I like doing the panels on the first page rather than clicking the symmetric. The disadvantage to that is it is panel specific, so you can't mix up your panels here and there. They have to be in exact order. But that's just a preference that I have.
Okay. Cool. So what are some good, I know I've used this a ton, and I've done some really great textures for some people. What are some of the textures that you've done that are popular that you've used for this type of rapid texture?
So there's a couple of them that are built into the software itself. So whether I want a chip texture, if I want more of a wave texture, the most common ones, however, are like a Sandblast or a bead blast look. That one is not built into the software, but I can show you those parameters inside of here. It is pretty popular, and you don't have to worry about any of the sandblasting beads or anything getting all over the shop. It is pretty similar to it. And then we also have some textures that that you can use with different geometries as well. So you can make it look like stitching or weaving. You can make it look like sand shell, some seashells, a lot of different things that you can do with it. It just depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, nice. Let's take a look at a few of them, and then that way we can kind of show the viewers what kind of some of the differences are in between some of these textures, and we'll show them the settings, and then show them on screen. See what we got.
Okay, so the first one, this one is pretty popular. So if we come in and we pick the expanded metal one, this one does have to deal with wave because with expanded metal, it is pretty similar as far as the way that it incorporates. So we have a longer wavelength, a short offset because our conic tool that we have built into the software is a little bit smaller. If we have a bigger one, that offset would grow with that tool. And then the horizontal amplitude generally is going to be half of the wavelength to create that perfect symmetric up and down in the Z.
Okay.
Okay. However, one thing to notice with wave is I have an 1/8 of an inch down here at vertical amplitude. That is actually going to come out to be a 1/4 inch in depth. So when you click wave, you actually have to cut the maximum that you want in half in vertical amplitude.
Good to know.
Like I said, another really popular one is the Sandblast. So generally, your wavelength as big or as short as you want. However, the offset, the horizontal, and the vertical, those all stay the same in order to create that effect. Okay? So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and we'll apply a few different ones. And a nice thing with the rapid texture is I could use the same one, but I could alter it before applying a toolpath, and I can actually get some different textures with the same parameters on the screen.
Great, cool. Let's look at them.
So with Sandblast, if we go ahead and we click apply, okay, this is kind of what we get. So we have a whole bunch of lines on screen. But if we go ahead and we go into the front view of En route, this is the power of the noise function within rapid texture. So each one of those lines is individually distorted, and that's why you're seeing all these variances in the Z.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when we go to cut this, what kind of settings should we use, like in a toolpath, in order to? That's going to be another thing, because I know we have to apply a special toolpath. What should we keep an eye out for when we apply toolpathing here?
Okay. So the one thing that you do want to make sure of is when you're applying a rapid texture, you want to make sure that your tool can actually cut to the depth that you have put in there. Because what it's going to do is it's going to reach that depth at some point in that toolpath. It may be at the far left-hand side, it may be in the middle, it may be in the right-hand side. But you want to make sure that the maximum depth that position is, that tool can actually reach.
Nice. Okay.
Now, generally, when you apply a toolpath, you have to give it a specific depth in order to cut out. Now, if we were to do that for this, as you saw with the varying Z depth, that would be a real pain, having to put in a certain depth for each and every line. So what we've done is, when you apply rapid texture, the nice thing is, no matter you're doing noise, wave, or rapid picture, or anything with rapid texture associated to it, you always toolpath it the same. Your tools may differ as far as which tool you're using, but the process is always going to be the same.
Okay.
So we're going to go into our engraving. And for this one, we do have to apply a tool. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that this one is a conic tool. So with the Sandblast look, generally a conic tool is the tool to pick for this. And we do have to give it some sort of depth. However, it is arbitrary because we click this follow contour down here. And every time I see follow contour, I try and remember that it's actually meaning follow the Z depth of that contour.
Okay. So it doesn't really matter. So the idea here is the depth doesn't really matter. You could put whatever you want in there. As long as you have that follow contour checked, then you're good to go.
Correct. I could put 12 inches in here as long as this is checked. However, if you are going to be that bold, make sure that that button is checked, because if not, it will try and go 12 inches.
Nice. Okay.
Okay. And then, of course, inside the three little dots to edit, you do want to make sure that you come in and put in some feeds and speeds. So I'm going to put in some general feeds and speeds in here.
Now, I do know one thing that I've experienced in the past is that when you're doing these rapid textures, sometimes it's also good to be aware that if your machine has like a Z lift feed rate or a slowdown, that also could slow down your feed rate. I know that my machine at home, when it comes to a Z movement, especially a very large Z movement, it will actually slow the feed rate down for me. So be aware of that as well, because that might also be an issue.
Yep, you're correct. Okay, so now we're going to click OK and OK again to apply. And now we've created our toolpath.
Now, how did you get that view that you got up there so that everybody knows? Because that kind of gives a good view of where the toolpaths are going to go. How do you get to that?
So what this is if you press F9 on your keyboard, it's a hotkey, and it is to render the width of the toolpath.
Perfect.
And so I could render it this way. I could also do a 3D render. So if I want to render with a specific material, or for this instance, this is just a two-tone piece, I can take a look and see exactly what that texture is going to look like. So, and in the perspective view, I'm just hitting Shift, right click and drag to rotate. And then if I want to press Control, right click and drag, it's going to zoom in and zoom out as well.
Yeah, that's looking nice. That definitely has a nice sandblasted look to it.
And if we rotate down just a little bit, we can actually start to see inside the material the different Z variants inside here as well.
Perfect.
Okay, so let's go ahead and let's pause this. Okay, and I'm just going to press F12 to quickly toggle back to the top view. And let's say that we have that texture and it's worked out, but I don't have a conic tool, but I have a Ballnose tool. So we can do the same process. It's simply, I just need to apply a Ballnose tool to it. So I'm going to get a slightly different look. It's going to be pretty similar to almost like pressed leather rather than sandblast with the Ballnose tool, but using the same parameters.
Interesting.
So the trick is, if I want to come in here, I could delete this tool and then add in my Ballnose. But the problem is then I'd have to go back in and add my feed rate, my spindle speed, my plunge rate. So if I just want to simply change the tool, I can actually come into this 3 little dots and I can just change it here and say, okay, I want to use a 1/4 inch Ballnose now. And now it's the same parameter. So it's still going to go to 200 inches per minute, 100 inch plunge, and 18,000 RPM. But now if we render this, you see there's a lot more coverage on here. So not as much exposed material. And then it's going to be rounded at the bottom rather than sharp, just due to the geometry of the tool itself. So you still get kind of that sandblasted look, but you get more of a...
Yeah, okay, so you get more of a rounded.
So still using the exact same parameters as far as the sandblast, and that I get a different look just by changing out the tool.
Great. So we can use different tools. We can use different patterns and whatnot as well. Let's. What would happen if, let's say we wanted to use this particular thing in a sign? So how would that look, and does that make sense in a sign, or how would we do that? You know, and maybe we could use a different texture with the sign.
Yeah, so this is very popular with signage, especially just due to the machine time. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up kind of a template that we've already designed, and I'll explain kind of how it's laid out and why it's there. Okay, so this is going to be the sign. So we have our border here. So we have a 1 inch border, and then our letters inside of here. These are going to be engraved. And essentially, we're going to have a very thin pinstripe around the end just to give it a little bit more attention to the letters themselves. So what we want to do is we want to apply the texture inside of here, but we don't want it to interfere with the letters or the border itself.
Okay.
So we have to use a process called masking. So just like a paint mask, what we're going to do is, if I'm using a conic tool, it's very easy. So the amount that I'm going to offset, so from the geometry that I want to the border of the rapid texture, is going to be the depth that I'm cutting. So if I'm using a 90-degree conic for this example, I'm going to give it a vertical depth of 0.25. That means my offset is also going to be 0.25, because I'm going to actually come back in and clean up the letters with a conic tool. So there's no interruption or interaction between those two. However, if I do want to use a Ballnose tool or another one, you do have to play with the offsets just a little bit. Generally, it's about half the diameter of the tool, though. That's a good starting point.
Okay.
Okay. And the most important part about this is, see how when I click the border around my letters, the border around here also is selected. So they're grouped together. That is very important, because of when we go into the rapid texture menu, instead of clicking our panels like we did before, I can say that this is the area that I want. And now it's selected and says, okay, this is the only area that you can go to.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's kind of our mask then, basically.
Yep. And as you can see, there's actually 3 different areas that we need to go back and we need to modify because they're not highlighted. So inside this E, the O, and the R.
Okay.
Okay.
See that.
So just something to look out with, because right now it would put the texture on the outside, but not inside these letters, which would make the sign look kind of odd.
Right.
So very easily, I can just select that, and I'm just going to hold Shift and add these as well. And I'm going to hit Group. And now I can go back and do this tool. And now you can see that now they're highlighted. So that's what I'm looking for. Okay. Now, one of the biggest things that we get when doing a mask is you want to make sure that your overlap is set to 0. So because it's going to be right here at the edge, that's as far as you want that tool to go. If you do an overlap, it will actually cut into the area you don't want.
Got it.
Okay. So we are going to go ahead and we'll do the same thing, but we're going to change this to 0.25 because that's what we have our offset at. So that way we still get that sandblasted look. Say okay. So now we have that nice texture and it's around here.
Oh,
have this
I
here.
forgot one little section there, but that's all right.
I did. Good news is I can select it and Enroute does save the last parameters I used. So I can simply just click apply and it'll do it in that area as well. Sorry, it's not supposed to be selected first.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys will notice is that it's important what things you have selected and don't have selected kind of when you go into it. So you notice what happened there is he had it selected before he hit the rapid texture. And then when he tried to click on it, it wouldn't let him select it again. So a lot of times when you click on the rapid texture, one of the things you want to do is not have anything selected unless you're using it as like a seed line or something like that.
That is correct. Okay, so now we have this. I'm going to go ahead and hold shift just so I can select this as well. Okay. Now you do, inside these little geometries, you do have to reselect those. Okay.
Nice. So that gives us a nice, so that's an easy way to apply, and that's probably gonna look pretty sharp once you apply your tool pathing and stuff.
So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna change this back to a conic tool inside here. So 90-degree conic. Okay. Now, a big thing, and this is something that I use a lot, is now everything is selected. It's been toolpath. However, when Enroute toolpaths it, it breaks up the grouping. So right now, each individual line is separate. So before I click anything else, I always like to hit group. So that way, if I do need to change something, everything selects in that rapid texture if I select a line. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to say that this is my original geometry inside here and the outside. So this is where we created the mask. So it was a 1/4 inch outside of the letters and inside here.
Okay.
So now what we want to do is we're going to engrave at a 1/4 inch depth because that's our offset and our vertical amplitude. But we're going to do a 3D internal engrave. So it'll do internal on this blue area and external on this red, which will clean up right along where that boundary is.
Perfect.
Okay, so now if we render it, I'm just going to press F9. Now we see that it is cleaned up around those letters. So in order to create that pinstripe, all I'm going to do is I'm going to select the inside letters and I'm going to do another engrave internally. So that way there's a little bit of material
Okay, yeah, that looks
left
good.
over. So now if we do a rendering, what I'm going to do is, since we have a sheet that's 40 inch by 40 inch, but our piece isn't that big, if I select the outside geometry and then go into our create rendered views, I can actually do a higher DPI on the rendering. So let's go ahead and let's do about 70. But I'm going to say use the contour selected as a mask, so that way I can get a better representation of what I'm seeing.
Now, if you were to try and create something like this with 3D versus this type of toolpath, what kind of time savings are you looking for here? I mean, is it a lot quicker, not that quicker, or how are we looking at?
Yeah, so generally you're going to get at least 2 times the savings. So depending on, like you said, your limitation as far as your Z-axis movement, how fast you can pick up and put down. We've seen areas where a 4x8 sheet of rapid texture has taken 45 minutes versus a 3D, which has taken 4 hours. So depending on your machine, you can actually get this done in a lot quicker than 2 times the amount. It just depends on which machine. But this method will always be faster than 3D texture.
Nice. Yeah, no, that looks pretty good. All right, so now we know how to. So we've done a rapid texture. We've done a rapid texture with a sign. I know there's one other thing that we wanted to talk about here in this webinar was rapid picture. It's one of those unique tools that we have in En-route. What is rapid picture? How does it work? And what's something that we can run on it real quick?
So rapid picture is a variant of rapid texture. So it is going to produce different lines within your geometry. However, it is based on the grayscale of your photo. So it will look at the photo and it will apply different parameters to it according, just like in rapid texture, how we had our 4 different settings. But the benefit is it's working off the grayscale as well. So not only do you get a textured look, you will also bring out the image as well.
Okay.
So,
and in your experience with rapid texture, I know you've done probably a lot more than I have, but a rapid picture, does it matter if it's colored? Should I have a high contrast or low contrast, or should I always convert it to grayscale? What are some of the images that I should really kind of look for when I'm trying to do a rapid picture?
So you can do pretty much any picture. However, it's more about the focal point. So if you have an image that has a lot going on to it, just because the process is more of a low resolution process, you do tend to lose detail. Now, the bigger that you go, the more detail that you will see. However, just like everything on your machine, the bigger that piece is, the longer it's going to take in order to machine. And I am a big fan of sepia photos, just because it lets my brain realize just a little bit more on the contrast towards the top and the bottom.
Perfect.
So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do an example of this, and the photo that we picked actually is not a sepia photo. It is just a close-up image of some pennies. So let's go ahead and let's create a new file. So let's take this and we're going to cut it, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do probably about a 20 by 20, just so we get a little bit better representation of it. You can do it with these parameters here, with roughly about 10. However, like I said, the bigger the photo is, generally the more detail that you're going to get. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to work with about a 20 by 20. Okay. So as you can see here, there's a lot of color inside here where it says United States. This is getting really dark down here. However, it's really light here, almost white. And then this is kind of middle of the road with a variant in it. Okay. So what we're going to do is inside rapid texture, kind of the same parameters that we used last time. So 20 by 20, this is our panel, just like we did the first example. However, the displacement is slightly different. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and use 3 as my wavelength. And these are the parameters generally that I like to use. So I'm going to use 0.15. My horizontal amplitude, I'm going to do about 0.4. My vertical amplitude, I'm going to do 0.04. Okay. There's a couple big things that you do have to remember when doing rapid picture versus rapid texture. One of them is you do have to unclick randomize because you don't want it to be random. You want it to be based off the grayscale. And then the second is essentially the hidden menu. You actually have to click on the photo itself, and then that will activate the menu saying, okay, you want to do rapid picture now, not rapid texture.
Okay.
So now we're going to come in. I'm going to say that I'm going to pick a 90-degree conic. White space gap means in between my lines at the smallest area, how big of a gap or flat area do I have to have? So to bring out more detail, you can leave it at 0.010 or you can go lower. However, it's more likely that material will chip with a small white space gap. So
Okay.
what I do is generally I do about 0.03, and that gives me a pretty decent gap to where the material will stay, it won't chip, but I can still bring out the image.
That makes sense.
Okay, so now it's just going to say, okay, this is verifying what you have. Okay. And then we're going to click apply. So this process, depending on the picture, the resolution, and how big of an area you're doing, it may take about just a minute to process this. It will run through the processing twice, smooth it twice, and then we'll actually create the geometries on screen.
Okay. So while we're waiting for this to process here, let's just take a look at questions real quick. It looks like we have a comment from Dan Moss. Says, keep the webinars coming. Yeah, no problem. Hopefully we'll be doing a lot of these soon. So every Wednesday we do a workflow Wednesday. We don't always do en route. We switch around sometimes. A lot of times we do flexi en route. So we're going to be mixing in en route a little bit more here, maybe every other week or so in the future. But yeah, glad to do it. Hope you guys are enjoying it. And it looks like we're close to being done on the processing.
Yep.
I think they're behind that image.
Yep. So generally when you import in an image, it will go to a different layer, which is why I was toggling this. But since I pasted it to the active layer, it's not on a separate one.
Oh, gotcha. Yep, that makes sense.
So I'm just going to drag this off to the right. And here's our lines, which, as we saw with rapid texture, doesn't look that impressive until we apply a toolpath or we take a look at it in the front view. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a toolpath. And just like rapid texture, the benefit is it's always applied the same. As long as I have follow contour on there, the depth doesn't matter. And if I press F9, I can actually start seeing the picture of what it's going to come out to look like.
Oh, that's really cool. So that's actually pulling out some of those details that we saw in that image.
Yep. So as you can see, it really focused kind of on this 1972 over here on the right-hand side, and then the Lincoln Memorial over here. So we have the United States here, and if we take a look at it in the perspective view or the render view, you can actually get a better kind of two-tone look for it. So kind of using the same trick we did before, using it as a mask, so that way we can get that two-tone look and a little bit higher resolution. We can really
Nice.
start
And
to
so,
see the picture pop.
yeah, now we're seeing that contrast from the surface to the back. Now, what kind of materials do you typically like to cut this kind of stuff out of? And what are some good ideas for people if they want to do this to help improve them getting that nice look to it?
So the two most common used materials for this is actually MDF. and then either regular wood or plywood. Generally, I go with plywood a little bit more than regular wood because sometimes the grain gets in the way.
Okay.
But if you are using plywood, generally if you stain it first or seal it, so if you do a real light stain and then seal it, or just seal it straight off, wait for it to dry, then you can machine it. Then you can actually hand stain the grooves and then it will wipe off the top because it's already been sealed.
Right.
Or
Nice.
in MDF, there's a couple different tricks. So you can use breakaway or knockoff glaze, which essentially you spray on either with a paint gun or a spray can. And it dries almost as baby powder. So you can essentially sand off or wipe off the top and then seal it, and the darkness will actually stay in the grooves. Or you can do the same thing that you did with the plywood where you seal the MDF first. Maybe you paint it or prime it white and then seal it. And then you can come back and put in a different color for contrast later on.
Nice. Well, that's an awesome look. And this is really easily done inside of EnRoute. You can tell with even just using these recommended settings. Now, can you say, you could say pretty much that if most people use those settings that you put in there today, that they get fairly good results, right? For most of the things that they do.
You would get fairly good results. However, it does vary by photo. So depending on what you're focusing on and the size. So just because this worked for a 20 by 20 doesn't mean that it's going to work for a small, let's say if I'm cutting an 8 by 10 to put in a photo frame. The same parameters aren't going to correspond with that because your spacing is going to be different. You have to get a lot more detail out of a smaller area. So I always tell customers this is a good jumping off point. So for decent sized panels, so I would say, a 20 by 20 panel, you can definitely start with these parameters, considering that's what I use them for. However, it is kind of a starting point. It's not a fix all button.
Okay. Well, great. No, this is really cool. Why don't we open it up for anybody who has questions? We'll kind of start wrapping things up here. If you guys have any questions, haven't had any yet, but if you have any questions, type them in the chat now. This is the time, and we'll address those. But this is something that's really easily done in EnRoute. We have all kinds of default wave and chip textures inside of EnRoute that are pre-built in that are really good starting points for you. So play around with those. And the nice thing is that you can use this 3D Simulate to kind of see what you're going to get ahead of time. And you can get some pretty amazing textures just using the profile of your tool and using 2D geometry basically to create this. And you're going to save yourself some time. I've had many customers using this inside of like inside of cabinet doors as a texture in different signs like we showed here, wall hangings, wall dividers. I mean, there's a million different things you can use this for. And so get in there and explore this and take a look at it and see what it has to offer, because it's really, once you kind of get into it and you kind of play around with it, you can do some really cool stuff. So let's just check with Bennett one last time. Do we have any questions here before we sign off for the day? We'll give him a second to respond there. Looks like no comments or questions yet. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Real big thanks to Jesse for coming on and helping me out with this. I know he's done a ton of rapid texture. I've done a ton of rapid texture, but it's always nice to kind of have a fresh face here on the live show. And so thanks for Jesse for coming on and helping us out. And you guys have a great week. We're going to be here next week, same time, Wednesday, 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, so join us then. Oh, it looks like we actually do have one quick question here that pulled in last second. It says, why can't I use the alignment tool to center a circle inside of an equal-sided triangle? All right, so that's a good question. So do you have any thoughts on that, Jesse?
So you have a circle inside of an equilateral triangle.
Yeah, what would be a good way to do that?
Okay, so let's go ahead, let's create a triangle. Okay, and a circle. Is the circle, whether it's bigger or smaller, we'll go ahead and we'll do one of each. So a bigger one and then a smaller one.
Okay, say we wanted to take that center one and that smaller one, put it in the center. What's the best way to get it into the center of that triangle?
Okay. So what I would do is I would highlight both of them. So it doesn't matter where this circle is, it can be out here. If I come in here and I say that I want to come over here to the alignment and just hit center here. So what you want to do is you want to move it into the center. So this is according to this bounding box.
Yeah.
And what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to shift it down. Okay. So according to the geometry of this is the center. However, if you do want to make the actual point, what I would do is I would probably create geometries here, the way that it's extending, and then place it in the center.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, so to answer your question, Alan, is what's happening there is when we use the alignment tools, like Jesse said, it's actually it's based off of the entire height and width, not the center. So I think what we want to do here is I think if we took, drew some lines and drew from the corner of each triangle to the edge, and we can use that really easily with the snap to points like he's using right now. And we can snap and create like an intersection right at the middle. And that would give us what we want. So just like this, we'll draw a couple shapes.
Sorry, that's not what I wanted.
And then we can find the intersection point, and then all we'd have to do is snap to the center of that intersection. So that one's kind of more of that's a little bit of an optical illusion when you do the, you would think that it would also put it in the center, but it's because of height is how it does that. But perfect. Now you've got, and now you can delete those lines, and now you're right back on the, right in the perfect. So that's how you do that. Hopefully that answers your question, Alan. Thank you for asking that question. That's actually a good question. So yeah, good question. All right, well, I think that's all the questions we have for now. So thanks, Jesse, again for coming in. Again, next Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern or Mountain Standard Time, we're gonna have this show again. Join us, and we will see you guys later. So have a great week, and stay safe, and hopefully you guys are staying busy. All right, bye.
Thank you.